Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Trottenchek, the Vice President of Publishing for the North American Retail Hardware Association and the publisher of Hardware Retailing Magazine. I'd like to welcome you to our final webcast of 2013. And we're going to talk this morning about our market measure report. This report is something that the Association and Hardware Retailing Magazine have been doing for some time, and we call it Market Measure, the industry's annual report, because it's the one time when we really sit and we look at what the industry is doing as a whole and how the industry has performed during the last year, and we look also at where the industry is likely headed over the next several years. So over the next few minutes, we'll talk about some of that performance and what some of the things are that are driving that performance. And like all our webcasts, this webcast is brought to you by Hardware Retailing, the North American Retail Hardware Association, and the NRHA Vendor Partner Program. And we obviously thank all of our vendor partners for the support they give us throughout the year and that make things possible like this. So without any further ado, let's talk about our market measure report and what our findings were. What we're going to be discussing throughout this webcast is first we're going to take a look at the home improvement industry and how it performed through the retail marketplace in 2013 and toward the end of 2012. We're also going to look at sales by store type within the home improvement industry, and we're going to look at unit counts within the home improvement industry and see how those have been changing and what trends we see unfolding in those areas. We're also going to discuss what are some of the trends, both internal and external, that are taking place in the home improvement marketplace that are determining the way sales go and that could have a direct impact on the home improvement industry moving forward. As we get into this and when we start talking about the numbers, one of the most common questions I get is, why do your numbers look different than some of the other numbers I've seen out there? Or why do your numbers look different from the government numbers? And why do not all the numbers that I look at for these kind of measurements look the same? And the truth is that every group that looks at things like the size of market measures the market a little bit differently. So let's talk a little bit, before I dive into the data, let's talk a little bit about where the NRHA data comes from. And we get our data from a variety of resources. One of the main resources we use is every year the NRHA conducts a study called our Cost of Doing Business study. We send out requests for information and feedback, and we get feedback from hundreds of home improvement retailers across the United States, where they provide us with detailed financial and performance information about how their stores are doing. They provide us with basically all their income statement and balance sheet information, and we compile a report out of this on an annual basis. And a lot of the data we're going to talk about today comes from those numbers. We also, NRHA being the publishers of Hardware Retailing Magazine, invest quite a bit of dollars every year into our circulation research. Now, this circulation means where we're sending the magazine to. Currently, our magazine goes to every home improvement store, hardware store, lumberyard, and home center in the United States and Canada. And that measures to just about 36,000 different units. We invest money every year where we hire telemarketers and we do research to verify these addresses and to verify who these people are and what kind of business they're doing that are receiving our magazine. So a lot of the size of market information and numbers is based off of the information we gather from our circulation research. Obviously, we also incorporate other things like government statistics and government reporting into our analysis, and we look at things like wholesale sales reports and other industry organizations that do similar research to help us determine the overall size of the market and unit count numbers that we utilize. Another reason that there are some differences between our numbers and some of the other numbers you see out there is because, like I said, we all measure the market just a little bit differently. But here's how we measure the market when we're talking about the numbers we're gonna look at. We base our industry size estimates on sales at retail, sales through retailer whose primary business is selling hardware and home improvement goods, and sales through retailers who sell core categories from the home improvement area within their stores. There are other industries out there that are closely aligned and might sell some home improvement products, but we don't include those numbers in the NRHA data that we're going to talk about. So now that we've talked about the methodology, let's talk about what happened toward the end of 2012 and throughout 2013 that really shaped what we saw in the industry. All the economic signs and the external factors that influence home improvement sales were very strong at the end of 2012 and through 2013. I think you've all probably realized, and anyone out there has seen, that the housing industry has gotten better. As a result, the consumer confidence is also looking up. And all of these things combined have helped to buoy home improvement product sales. The job market has also, while it hasn't come to full recovery, has seen at least stabilization and some positive upticks that help drive things like consumer confidence. And a little bit later on, we'll look at how things like housing and consumer confidence are direct correlations back to how home improvement industry sales perform. Also in 2013, though, one of the reasons we saw growth but didn't see the kind of growth that we would really get excited about, it really comes down to external issues that have been keeping kind of a governor on the way the economy performs. We'll talk in detail about some of these issues, but I don't think it's too hard to understand that we've been doing a lot of self-inflicted wounds on our economic recovery, whether it's ping-ponging from one government crisis to the next, or issues that are beyond our control, like weather patterns and how those affect home building and home improvement. Plus, there's also just some changes that are taking place in the home buyer market that are really not necessarily having a negative impact, but aren't necessarily having the positive impact that they once did on the home improvement market. And we'll look at all of that. But one thing that we do see coming out of 2013 is there still is positive momentum, positive economic indicators, and we think that the pent-up demand for housing and the pent-up demand on things like remodeling will really make 2014 and 2015 two of the largest growth years that the home improvement industry has seen in some time. So let's look at some specific factors from 2012 and 2013. Year-over-year sales in 2013 for the home improvement industry came in at just about 5.5% growth, and it did outpace the nation's economy by almost a full 2 percentage points. So we did see strong growth in 2013 over 2012. In 2013, we predict that sales will come in for the industry right around $308.3 billion versus $292.8 billion that they reported in 2012. So what we have seen is steady growth over the last 4 or 5 years for the industry after it really fell off the table. But as I said, we're looking at even stronger growth in 2014 and 2015 as the economic conditions in the United States continue to improve. We're going to think that the home improvement industry is going to reap the benefits of that, and so we're really poised for stronger growth, strong yet modest growth over the next 2-year cycle. When you talk about things that held back the growth and have the potential for holding back growth in the home improvement industry, it becomes very difficult to predict. And some of the things that we certainly saw in 2013 that held back growth are things we already talked about, like the external political struggles and some of the weather patterns, which obviously is up to anybody's guess as to what's going to happen as we move forward. And obviously that can impact the growth that we're predicting for the industry. What were some of the positive things that happened in 2013 that allowed us to have the 5+% growth? Well, obviously the housing market was a big bright spot. And specifically, some of the things that we saw in the housing market was that it was returning to normalcy and houses were starting to change hands and inventory remained at lows. But some of the things that offered key triggers for that were the fact that something we've talked about for quite a while is that banks finally began really lending money again and more consumers started taking advantage of that. As we approached the end of the year and as we're moving into 2014, we think banks are going to be even more liberal with their lending practices, although we think that they've also learned a lesson from what happened in the early 2000s. So it is going to open up home ownership and home sales for more people. Housing prices have started to steady, in fact, rise in some areas. So people are once again motivated to move homes, and that all spells good news for the home improvement market. And that really began to take hold in 2013. One thing that also changed was the home buyer makeup. The entire concept of renting has really had an impact on the home improvement retail sales, not just from the rental standpoint, but also from the more and more people that are becoming investors in rental properties. And while that remains to be part of the segment from the higher wage earners, more individuals who might have not have thought that they would get involved in the rental game have been enticed by the low prices on housing and their access to cash, and you're starting to see more upper middle income families become renters, both on the owning side of rental properties and on the renting side of rental properties, depending on their financial situation. But rental and the opportunities that presents for home improvement retailers is going to continue to have an impact going into 2014 and 2015. overall, consumer confidence has certainly returned. The one thing that dampened consumer confidence was, as we discussed, the government crises and the media attention that's giving to those government crises. But more consumers were willing to take on debt. More consumers were willing to tackle larger projects. And when you looked at what consumers were spending their money on, home improvement was one of the areas that, home improvement, auto buying, and things like that, were some of the areas that really fared well in 2013. Let's specifically talk about some of this stuff. When you look at the chart that we're going to show you right now, it shows the direct correlation between housing starts and comp store sales growth. And this chart comes from our NRHA Executive Trends Survey. This is a survey that we send out every month to about 500 independent home improvement retailers throughout the United States and Canada. And we ask them for their specific feedback on how their sales are performing and how they predict to perform and how they performed this period over last period and same period last year. If you look at this chart for a moment, though, what it really shows is that housing starts are directly correlated to the way the home improvement industry sales move. And you can see that there's about a 1 period lag on the performance at sales versus the housing starts numbers, but what this goes to illustrate is as housing starts continue to increase, that's one of the reasons we're predicting a stronger increase. And we think that with greater access to cash, with greater access to lending availability, and with the existing home inventory as low as it is, that housing starts will continue to grow at a strong pace through 2014 and 2015. The next chart we're showing you here really illustrates the same thing, that as consumer confidence grows, that is directly correlated to sales at home improvement retailers. And so again, everything that happens within the economy to increase that consumer confidence is only good news for home improvement sales. So that's the good news. What are some of the things that might restrict this growth of consumer confidence or the housing starts that directly correlate to the home improvement industry sales? Well, I talked about it before, and one of the most difficult things to manage or predict are these self-inflicted wounds that we're inflicting on the economy. The government gridlock, small business unfriendly regulation, all of these things that bind and concern consumers and keep their wallets in their pockets instead of going out and spending money. It does seem, for whatever limited degree, that the government may be moving towards some form of compromise. Certainly towards the end of 2013, we had some shadows that there may be some compromise. And I think both parties have gotten the message from voters and have gotten the message that we need compromise to keep our economy moving forward. So we're hoping that that spirit is going to continue into 2014 and 2015. And if it does, and we can remove some of those external issues that dampen consumer confidence, we might even see stronger growth for the industry than we've even predicted. Another thing that is beyond even the control of the politicians in our own country are some of the global issues. There's no doubt we're certainly in a global economy, and things that occur halfway around the world will have an impact on Main Street in the United States, whether it be in the form of commodity pricing and issues that affect things like housing package prices, to simply the concern over consumer confidence from the swings we've seen in things like oil prices when things occur halfway around the world. So that's something that we certainly have to keep our eye on, and that could have a positive or negative impact on the way the home improvement industry goes. Lending practices and unemployment. Right now, banks give every indication that they are once again opening their doors to consumers, and they're broadening their considerations for consumers that might be credit challenged or might not have 20% down to put on a house. And any way that the banking industry can come up with that will maintain the integrity of the house lending market, but also allow more people to sell houses and more people into the housing market is going to be good news for the home improvement retailing community. Weather is another issue that there is certainly no way to predict, but we have seen over the last few years how great an impact weather can play on the home improvement market. When there's a hot, dry summer and grass doesn't need to be cut and flowers can't be planted, that hurts. When there is a dry winter and snow doesn't need to be shoveled or blown off driveways, that can hurt. And we've seen some very unusual weather patterns over the last several years, and we're hoping and planning that 2014 and 2015 might provide some sort of return to normalcy. The last thing that will impact specifically the independent segment of the home improvement retail channel is retailers' ability to adapt to changing consumer needs. And this is something that we're really trying to preach at NRHA and through hardware retailing, is that home improvement retailers on the independent segment need to be more open and understanding of changes that are occurring both in how people shop and how homes are made up these days. Be conscious of things like the fact that the rental market is playing a bigger role in home improvement purchases, and adjust inventories and adjust product mixes to accommodate that. Understanding that non-traditional families are making up a larger percentage of American homes, and how that impacts do-it-yourself activities and the needs for households. Understanding generational changes, that the older Americans are staying in their homes longer, so that presents opportunities for additional sales of things like home safety equipment. And our ability as an industry to be able to sell these kind of products is also going to be what's going to have those little incremental impacts on the sales of home improvement products overall. So that said, specifically, let's look at some areas that we're identifying as growth opportunities within the home improvement channel for the next 2 years. Home repair and maintenance, which has really carried the channel since the recession, because as remodeling and home building eroded, home repair and maintenance became the primary driver, certainly through the independent channel of home improvement retail sales. And we look for home repair and maintenance to continue carrying a majority of the load as the market certainly continues to improve. But until housing gets to not necessarily pre-recessionary levels, but returns to a little bit greater robust nature, we're still going to see home repair and maintenance playing a large role in how the industry performs. We are predicting that smaller scale remodeling projects that began to pick up in 2013, we'll continue to see those gain traction in 2014 and 2015, helping drive that growth in the industry. And when we're talking about small scale remodeling projects, we're saying things like kitchens and bathrooms will continue to grow in the remodeling area, though we think that things like home additions and so on, that where you get into a little bit larger structural issues, will probably be slower to see growth, as people still have difficulty drawing the equity required out of their homes to perform those kind of home remodeling projects. We've talked a lot about the rental market, and rental from both an investment standpoint, but also from a home lifestyle standpoint, are playing a greater role in home improvement. Within categories specifically, we look at outdoor living, and the rural lifestyle market will continue to grow and to continue to have greater penetration throughout all consumer categories, as those kind of interests continue to gain traction. Home gardening and hobby farming. If you just look at the social trends that are taking place right now, we predict that those two areas are going to have room for growth. There's also going to be more transitional housing needs, which translates to things like storage and safety. And when we talk about transitional housing needs, we're talking about both older homeowners who are staying in their homes longer, but we're also talking about the different changing home buyer makeup, where you have multiple generations within one household. When you have siblings or friends going in and buying houses together, their needs are decidedly different than what someone who might be your traditional family buying a home would be. Lastly, home security and home safety we see as having increasing potential for growth in the coming years because of more concerns in those areas. And when you look at home safety and security and the areas that impacts, like builders hardware, there are opportunities that are presented by other things we've talked about, like the rental market. So to sum up what we see lying ahead, at the macro level, we're predicting stronger growth periods for the home improvement industry for 2014 and 2015. In fact, we're predicting some of the strongest growth we've seen since before the recession for the industry. So now is a great time to take advantage of this growth and position your business for that growth. Of course, as we've discussed, outside influencers, political unrest, political issues that can affect things like consumer confidence in the job market, and other things beyond that, like weather, can have a direct impact on that growth. Consumer activities will center, when it comes to home improvement, will center likely most around comfort and lifestyle needs as opposed to investment, increasing home investment to increase property values. You'll still see more people engaging in remodeling and home activities to repair and maintain their homes or to increase the comfort level at their homes, not necessarily looking with an eye towards improving the value for resale of their homes. All right, let's take a look specifically at the industry performance numbers. As we said, here's what we see the industry looking like going forward, and those are some pretty solid numbers and solid growth that we still think will outpace the overall economy. We like to provide a different view on the numbers here, and this comes from the Home Improvement Research Institute and their IHS Global Insights Size of Market Study. And we can see that they're predicting, their growth that they're predicting is tracking roughly in line, perhaps a bit more optimistic than we are with our views of growth, but still predicting steady growth over the next several years. So what are we looking at? If you look at 2007 to 2012, those were the roughest years for the industry. And the trough that we went into really saw compound annual growth fall, and it gets a little bit better every year. We've seen growth coming out of the recession. But 2012 to 2017, we're predicting growth in the 5.1% compound annual growth area, which again, we think will slightly outpace by a point or 2 points the economy as a whole. When you do look at it, though, that growth might seem a little bit more modest than you might have predicted in other areas. But when you look at peak to trough, that's some pretty tremendous growth for the industry over just a 5-year period, and certainly when you look back over the past 5 years. Specifically, when you talk about the retail and industry dynamic and what this kind of growth and what we see happening within the retailing industry over the next several years, the big box dynamic has been one of the most interesting things to watch as we've come through the last several years, and how the recession has affected the big box players, which certainly play a role on overall performance within the industry. And Home Depot, that had seemed to be on the ropes for a while, has really poised and refocused on customer service and redoing inventory and creating inventory delivering efficiencies that have allowed it to really put a solid hold on its number one position and come up with a message and a format that is once again resonating with consumers. There are a lot of questions still out there about the number 2 market performer, Lowe's, and how they will position themselves going forward. They've made some interesting moves in 2013, their acquisition of Orchard Supply, and how that will play into the overall makeup of the company and what that means for the company going forward in terms of formats that they're going to be using and how they may or may not use that format across their existing platform. So that's something to watch in the coming years. Another thing that seems to be playing out on a monthly basis is how online pure play retailers like Amazon will factor into the home improvement market space. Obviously, Amazon has made an impact across all retail markets, but how players in our home improvement market like Home Depot and Lowe's are going to react to that remains to be seen, and how Amazon is going to continue to push into the home improvement market will be an interesting story to watch as the years unfold here. At the independent level and at the distribution level, and manufacturing, once again, we're looking at consolidation, and that just seems to be kind of the rule of the road these days, is that consolidation will continue to accelerate and occur within the home improvement industry as companies look for efficiencies and as consumers are demanding different choices and different selection from both retailers and from the manufacturers. Let's take a look for a minute and transition into the different store types and how the store types performed. And for this, we pretty strictly look at our cost of doing business survey information. And as we define hardware stores, home centers, and lumber yards, it takes just a moment for me to explain how exactly we are defining those different store types. So when we look at the data, you have a little bit better understanding of exactly what type of stores we're referring to. Hardware stores, by our definition, are stores whose primary business is selling hardware and home improvement items. They carry all of the products across all of the core categories for home improvement. They sell little to no lumber and building materials beyond perhaps a convenience assortment, but there are no size or sales limitations on what a hardware store can be in our definition. A home center, by our definition, is kind of a hybrid of a hardware store and a lumberyard. To be defined as a home center by our statistics, you have to have a minimum of a 10,000 square foot under roof selling area. You can carry a full assortment of hard lines as well as lumber and building materials. And this definition and where we look at the overall industry statistics does include the big boxes. A lumber dealer is defined, it could be either a chain or an independent lumber dealer. Our definition of lumber yards and what we look at in our numbers are lumber yards that allow consumer traffic, that have under roof selling area of less than 10,000 square feet, and derive a significant portion of their sales from lumber and building materials. So let's take a look at sales by store type. For the last several years, we saw hardware store sales remaining pretty steady while home centers and lumber yards took the majority of the downturn in the market. This would certainly stand to reason because they were selling more lumber and building materials and those larger ticket items, all products that were a little bit more closely tied to the housing and remodeling markets, whereas hardware stores typically concentrated on the more home repair and maintenance items, which didn't see as big of a hit during the economic downturn. Over the next several years, we see hardware store sales posting modest growth, but not the same kind of growth that we're going to see at the home centers and lumberyards. And again, this stands to reason as remodeling, larger ticket purchases, and house building continue to pick up. These last two formats, home centers and lumberyards, should see the majority of the growth within the industry. Number of outlets. You could look at this, and we do see another question we get quite a bit is how has the number of outlets within the industry changed over the last 10 years, 20 years? And the truth is that the number of outlets are going down. There is a steady decline in the number of home improvement outlets serving the industry. It's perhaps not as steep as most people would assume, but it tracks to about 1% a year or so of decline within the industry. And certainly over the last several years, as we talked about with the sales contribution for the industry, we saw heavier declines in the home center and lumberyard areas because those were the areas that were feeling the hardest hit from the recessionary cuts in spending. As you look forward, this seems to level out. In fact, we're actually seeing a little bit of growth as we come out of 2013 for home centers. So let's take a look at the financial profile of the average hardware stores that we're seeing in the industry. And some of the things you'll see is in our cost of doing business study, we break out both the average store performer and the high profit store performer. And the high profit stores are the top 25% of respondents to our study in the area of profits. And so what we try and do with these numbers is find areas that what are the differences? What are the things that the high profit performers are doing within their operations that allow them to deliver those higher bottom line profits? So let's take a look at some of these numbers. The high profit stores responding to our survey had higher average sales, which might seem logical, but it's certainly not only the case, always the case, because top line sales don't necessarily translate to bottom line profits. They're getting a higher gross margin, generating more out of the square footage they have, and they have a lower overall operating expense that translates to a profit before taxes that's nearly 3 times as high as the average store. Some interesting notes from this year's cost of doing business study. Participants this year had, the hardware store participants in this year's study had the highest per store sales volume and the highest sales per customer since NRHA has been doing this report. The per store sales volume was just over $1.4 million per store, which again, we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples because we get different sets of respondents every year. Nonetheless, what we did see was that the group we had this year was reporting the highest per store sales that we have seen since we've been doing the study. Cost of goods was also at its highest. So that's why it didn't necessarily translate to the best profits we have seen since we've been doing the study, because cost of goods have also been increasing, which would, of course, have an impact on that overall top-line sales number. Lowest overall operating costs that we've seen in the past 6 years of 39.5%. This was pretty incredible. One thing that you'll see really across the board from store types that the recession did teach a lot of home improvement retail operators was how to operate more efficiently. And across the board, you see that high performance operators have better control on their expenses than the average stores. Also, we saw return at net worth for hardware stores at its highest percentage in 6 years. So overall, 2012 and 2013 were good years for hardware store operators who were able to control their expenses and also get more productivity out of their sales, out of their inventory, and out of their employees. Let's take a minute look at home centers for a minute. And this is a perfect area of where I had described that top-line sales don't necessarily translate to the most significant bottom-line profits, because that's exactly the story we saw with home centers coming out of 2012. Some other interesting numbers to note on here was that inventory per square foot at the average store was actually higher than at a high-profit store. But one very compelling thing to look at is what we just talked about. At the high-profit home centers, operating expenses were significantly lower than at the average store. Now, one of the reasons you might see some things like higher inventory per square foot was that a lot of these stores that registered as average were probably more heavily invested in commodity related items than the higher performing stores. So there's some margin difference there, but those high commodity items are also taking up sales floor space. But it translated to profits that were more than twice as high at a high profit store than at an average store. In contrast to the hardware store participants who had the highest average sales per store that we had seen, the home centers actually had the lowest average sales we had seen. We also posted at the high profit stores some of the lowest customer counts we've seen in the past 2 decades, with the average stores only posting 78,000 customers. $2 drop in average transaction size, which probably signals that those customers were not buying the big ticket items that they once did. However, the home centers that we looked at year over year, 2011 to 2012, did post year over year sales increases, drove net worth to 12.8% of sales, in large part by higher gross margins. And the 3.2% bottom line profit at the average stores was the best we had seen since the study began. Let's take a look at lumber dealers. And again, this was an area where we think that the lower top line sales didn't necessarily translate to greater profitability. But what we did see with lumber dealers was a return to stronger profitability than they had certainly seen in several years. The lower gross margin at the high profit stores would suggest that they are actually able to sell some of these commodity related items for larger building projects that people aren't necessarily turning to the home centers for. And again, a very important number to note that has an incredible impact on that bottom line is the total operating expense and how significantly lower it is at a high profit store than an average store. Participants this year in our study saw sales and profits both up despite lower customer counts. So the customers that are coming in are actually spending more money. Average sales, which is dictated in the next line here, average sales to these customers hit an all-time high of $141. Reporting group saw the highest per store sales volume since the study began, with $4.43 million per store. Also reported the highest return on net worth since the study started, averaging 11.4%. And while bottom line profit for the average store is still modest, it is at least in positive territory. And during the height of recession, there were a number of years where lumberyards, the average lumberyards in our study, were reporting negative profitability. So as modest as it may be, it is a return to the positive side of the charts. So in conclusion, what are we seeing out of our market measure report and predicting for the future? One, the economic recovery is continuing. It did not have that spike that everybody had hoped for where we just returned to pre-recession normalcy, but that might not be a bad thing either. This modest, moderate growth that we're seeing we think is sustainable, but we do think that 2014 and 2015 are going to present some of the best years for growth that the industry has seen in a while. And again, strong measured growth consistently outpacing the U.S. economy as a whole for the home improvement industry. Home improvement retailers are undoubtedly reaping this growth as a result of the return to confidence from consumers and the revitalization of the housing market. Consumers' changing needs are also impacting the opportunities within categories that are available in the home improvement marketplace, and retailers should keep a close eye on those changing needs as they're looking for areas for potential growth. We are poised for some of the strongest growth the industry has seen in years. But this growth is going to likely be measured. And again, it's important to note that it is still fragile, that anything from these external influences could have a heavy impact on this growth, both in a negative way and in a positive way. Unfortunately, the negative potential probably is a little bit more costly than the positive impacts of the positive potential, but it's still something that in large part is beyond our control. So let's keep our fingers crossed for good, strong weather, normal weather patterns, and let's keep our fingers crossed that on the political front we could have a year of harmony with midterm elections coming up in 2014. There aren't a lot of politicians that are going to necessarily want to go against the grain, so at least for 2014 we might see a little bit of a return to calm and compromise in Washington, and if that's the case, we're really thinking that our predictions for strong growth in those years will hold true. And that being said, there are great opportunities for manufacturers, distributors, and retailers in the home improvement industry for the years coming forward. And we've fought the good fight over the last several years. We've learned a lot of things about expense control and how to run our businesses more efficiently and how to drive sales when sales were hard to come by. So we need to apply those principles when we're going into a growth cycle and help the industry grow together. I'd like to thank you all for coming to our final webcast of 2013 and wish you all a very prosperous 2014 and encourage you, should you need anything from the North American Retail Hardware Association or Hardware Retailing Magazine or have any questions about this webcast, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again. I'm Dan Trottenchek, Vice President of Publishing and Publisher of Hardware Retailing Magazine.